In this section, we're going to be discussing transaction data sources. Transaction data sources are designed to facilitate the updating of data in databases. And obviously that includes Syspro data as well as external data in other databases as well. Just like the query data sources, they can be automatically invoked by controls in the app, such as your combo boxes and UI events. The key difference, though, is that clearly, as query data sources were returning data to you, in this instance, you've got to be sending data from your app back out to the databases. So to do that, data required by the data sources can be mapped to fields and variables in the app, so that when the data source runs automatically, it can suck the data in, put it in the right places in its XML or in its SQL statement, and then do its business. So there are two types of transaction data source: the business objects. And those of you who've done customizations and custom panes and things already will know about these. So the transaction business object has a post and a setup transaction type, and the transaction data sources can handle both. The XML in of those business objects control how Syspro posts the transaction. And another XML document, I tend to call it XML doc, holds the data which the business object is going to be giving to the database or the system, so that it can update the data. And this data is the data that's mapped to fields and variables in the app. Now, with custom data sources, this allows developers to do server-side updates of data in a database, which could include creating tables, stored procedures, and other SQL commands. In truth, you can do actually any instruction to a database that you actually want with the custom transaction data sources. Just one note of caution: when updating Syspro tables, we strongly recommend you use business objects, because they will maintain the data integrity across the system. And I know that people do tend to use SQL statements to update Syspro data, it works well. But just be very, very careful that you make sure that if you're doing a proper transaction, creating a sales order, posting an invoice, and all those kind of things, you do it through a business object, because there are multiple tables that have to be kept in sync. So we're going to be working, like before, through a worked example. It's going to be a cut down version of a customer maintenance app. And the reason I've chosen this is it is actually one of the ship samples. It's called SAM TR1. And remember, with the samples, they're read-only, but you can copy them, rename them, and then you can hack them around and have a look at the code anyway. So we'll be working through this. And just as an aside, really, right at the beginning, I think, of this course, we were talking about help and notepad help and things, and rich text format, and the fact that this editor here is actually fairly simplistic. So here is an example of having created some help in Microsoft Word, saved it in RTF format, reopened the file, cut and pasted it straight into this notepad control, and you can see that you can keep pictures and all sorts of things. You can actually make some fairly snazzy online help for your apps. So that's what we're going to be trying to do. We will have an ability to try and make it the same as Syspro. So we'll key in a number here, a customer number. If it finds it, it will populate the form and in effect go into update mode. If the customer number is unknown, it clearly will clear the form and go into add mode. And then we've got some navigation buttons here and help and so on like that. So let's see how we get on, and let's start straight away. Well, here I am in the app designer, and I've started building the toolbar for our app. We've been through all this before in previous courses, and indeed this course. We have a file and an exit button there. We have a save button. So we can see the event ID here. I picked up an icon. I've said it's icon only. and giving it a tooltip. Same with the new. We've got a customer combo here, which we've seen before. Event ID 38,000 means to the rest of the whole of Syspro, that's a customer combo box, which is why it puts up the magnifying glass. And according to our spec now, we need our 4 navigation arrows, which come with all Syspro maintenance programs. Now, you might think, well, that's going to be laborious, but in fact, App Designer has a neat way of doing this. If you're in the toolbar design tab here, right at the end of the menu here, there are 3 little dots, a little bit easy to miss actually. And if you click on them, you get a few more extra functions. One of those functions is to add the navigation buttons. So we add the navigation buttons. It's clever enough to have looked down the toolbar, seen customer and said, do you want these navigation buttons to be linked to the customer? And we want to say yes, and it will put them in for us. Then we want another button for help, so we will put help in here. We will pick up an icon for help, which is there. Great, and we'll probably put a begin the group. So let's have a quick run of that, and we'll just see those icons working, the navigation buttons working rather. Okay, so here we are, and I'll file our exit, which we'll do in a minute. If we key a customer number in here, clearly it's not going to do anything, but it's got the customer number in it. And then we start going next, next, next. You can see the number going up here as it's getting the next record and populating it back in. So that's all working. We've got to wire up now some of these other bits and pieces. So let's go and do that. So the first thing I tend to do is get the help buttons working. We've got a bit of help tucked away here, just on the normal pane. And just to remind you, on the help button down here, we've got a show dialog box. Obviously, that's a dialog box. No code required. It will just pop up when we press it. So the first thing we want to do is get the query bits working so that when we key in a customer that exists, it will populate the form. So we do that with our query data source. So let's call this customer header. It's going to be a business object. That works okay. We don't want it there. So we want a RSQRY. We really ought to reduce the XML coming back. So we'll change these. And we'll save that. That's good. We want to select the node. And we want the header. And that's all the information that we're actually going to be looking at. So we'll select that. That looks okay. So we'll close that. Next job will be to add a form. So we go to our toolbox, we add our form, and then I will just simply select the right fields off the query database, the query data source, and populate it like we've just done in the previous section. So I'm not going to bore you with that. I'll get on with that and come back in 2 ticks. Okay, making some progress. So I nipped down the list of fields coming back from the data source, and I've added them to our field, our form. I've resorted them into the sequence that our spec had, and we begin to make some progress. There are 1 or 2 things that I wanted to point out. If we look at customer, for instance, I've made it read only because clearly the customer number is going to be in the combo box, but we would like it in the form, but we don't want anybody typing on it. And then I've done a little bit of jiggery pokery here to show you a couple of things. The customer on hold is a yes/no field, and it will be coming from ARSQRY. But I think in our form, it'd be nice to have a checkbox. So I just wanted to show you that. What I've done is, having added all these fields in, I've gone through to design form here and added customer on hold 2, and I'm going to change that shortly, but this is just to show you, and also a balance type. And the customer on hold 2 was a checkbox type. And if we click on there, the key thing here, if we go to field properties, is this one: apply a yes, no for the checkbox. It explains what happens here, but basically, normally a checkbox from a programming point of view is a 0 and a 1, unchecked, checked. But obviously, a lot of data coming back from Syspro is yes, no. So this is App Designer translating the yes, no's for you into a checkbox. And then on the balance type, there are 2 options: there's open item or balance forward, I or a B. And rather than just have I or a B here, it would be nice to be able to select either or. So I went into design form, added a combo box here. And in fact, what I'll do is if I go to design form here, and we click on this, you'll see that it's a balance. That's the caption. And because it's a combo, I've manually entered the 2 elements there, and you can see here that the have an enumerator on the end in square brackets, which is a B for open, a balance forward rather, and I for open item. Now, what will happen is that if it detects a B, then the text will come up, or an I, that text will come up, and vice versa. If we select it in the combo box, it will return a B or an I to the business object. It's all done for you, really quite clever. So if we just quickly come out of this, and we'll run our app. Okay, beginning to look good. Okay, so we can see our customer number coming here. It's coming back just as we did in the query data sources. Nothing special here. I've just mimicked what we did in the previous section, but this is the bit I wanted to show you. So customer on hold, the data coming back from ARSQRY is an N. Our checkbox is blank. The code coming back from ARSQRY is I for open item, and our combo has picked up the I and translated it to the words open item. So what I'm going to do now is remove balance type and customer on hold, tidy this up so we don't need those. They were just there to show you. And then we'll just move on and start to set up a few more bits and pieces. The first being that we would like some explanation in the tooltip here for the dollar and the codes for currency and so on like that. Now, if you remember, I'm just going to drag it over here. This was our spec. So this is what I'm talking about here. It would be nice to implement those. So at the moment, I'm just going to concentrate on putting those in and showing you how to do those. And then we will start to move on to put the transaction bits and pieces in. Okay, I've been tinkering with our forms. I've removed the extra bits that we had for demonstration purposes, and I've been working on those turquoisey tooltips. But before I do show you what I've been up to, just one thing I'd forgotten to mention is on the form. Clearly the form is editable, otherwise we wouldn't be able to key any data into it. And I've also enabled it to be enabled on initial load. Now we may change this later on, startup not editable, and then we'll use VB script to make it editable or not. But I just forgotten to flag those up. So let's have a look at something like branch. The way that the form works is that if for branch, for instance, this right-hand bit is where the text or the data is required, and there is an option to be able to display a tooltip in a section just before it. The way that we do that is if we go to branch, we go to form field properties, and we can see down here under binding, select tooltip binding, and it works exactly the same as the field. You just basically bind a bit of data to that tooltip. So in this instance, I went down here, scrolled down the data source until we got to SAL BRN description, that's sales analysis branch description. Click on that, and away it goes in there. Now, as you click on it for the first time, it will come up saying, do you want to display this field as a key description? And you normally say, yeah, well, you would say yes. And if you say yes, it goes in there. What that's doing is checking that checkbox there. If that is ticked and you've got data bound there, then that data will appear in that section there. And it's the same for all the others. For currency, I picked up TBL cur description. For salesman, sell SLS name. So these are just element names from the data source that we're doing. So if we actually run our app, here we go, put one in here. Okay, so now we see these descriptions coming in our tooltips here. We've got open item coming as before, and the customer on hold is not on hold. From getting the data from an existing customer, presented it into an editable screen in a format that's readable and editable, that's actually where we're at the moment. So what we're going to do, move on now, is start to look at the transaction data source and how we map that, and then we've got to start building some VB script around to control as and when we're going to be doing things. As an example, and where we'll start first, is that when we kick an existing customer in, we want to be able to update it. And then once we've got that under control, we will then introduce code to say, well, if the customer doesn't exist, let's add the customer. So let's move on to do that. So let's go and add a transaction data source. So we'll go to the transaction data source pane, add transaction, give it a name. And we're going to be using a business object. Now, those of you who are familiar with Syspro business objects will know that a transaction business object has a couple of types. The primary one is post. That's actually posting transactions like, I don't know, posting invoices, cash, actual transactions. Maintenance programs have setup, add, update, and delete. We're going to be updating, so we'll select that one. And we want to update the customer master file, which will be here. So we just double click that and we can see we're doing customer maintenance. So far, much the same as the query data source. Edit XML in is the same. If we want to change any of these, we can, but we'll take the defaults for the time being. Now, one of the other things that I skipped over is the error handling. I've got it set to showing all errors. Those of you who've got, experience with updating Syspro with business objects will know that when you present a business object, it can come back with all the errors, all the problems, rather than presenting, doing a transaction, getting one error, fixing it, trying again, getting another error, fix it. You can do all the errors, or don't show any, or just show the first one. So it's under your control. Personally, I like to see all of them. So the main step now is to map the data on our form to the XML document that we actually want to send to Syspro, and we do that here. So let's have a quick look at what we've got. On the left-hand side here, we have got all the elements that the business object might need to do what we actually want it to do. These come from the XSD document, which means that it can actually find tooltips. It knows it's the size, whether they're repeating nodes, a full description of actually what the field is. And on the right-hand side here, we've got a list of all the fields on our forms and the toolbars. Now, the technique now is to map these fields on the right hand side to the fields on the left hand side. Now it is a bit of a skill, but just to show you that in the help screen here, then there's a full description of how to do this. So if you do forget, because often you'll do it once and then not do it for a while, at least it explains it there. So to map a field from our form onto our XSD, we highlight the item in the XML element here. Now, straight away, as soon as we've clicked on this, what you'll find is our list has changed. What App Designer is trying to do is help you speed things up a bit. It's picked up this description here, and it's searched down the form fields and just displaying those form fields with the word customer in. Now, this helps if you've got a huge form and great number of fields. If you, as in this case, have only got a few fields, then it's controlled by this checkup up here, autofill. If we turn that off, then we get all the fields, and we will continue in this manner. But it also means that if for instance, we had got, I don't know, we had a field that we wanted to map to name, but we didn't call it name. Maybe we called it a customer description as an example. Then you'd get a blank thing here and say, well, where's my fields have gone? Just uncheck that and you'll see all your fields again. So we'll go back to customer. Here we will highlight it, double click it. Now, a couple of things have happened here. Just move off onto the name. First of all, on the left-hand side, we now know that the customer key here has been mapped to the form field customer, and the customer field here has been mapped to item key customer. So we're getting a double check here. If we want to delete anything, we just highlight it on the left-hand side and press the del key, and it will remove the binding. Okay, so if we want to, as we probably will in this case, rather than bind directly to that one, we can also bind to toolbar. And if we do that, and again, we're highlighting it and double click it, we now see that we're getting the app name.toolbar 38,000. Remember the event ID 38,000, it knows it's a customer. So it can bind to there. So you will find that if both forms, toolbars, and list views, and we will discuss those shortly, can be bound to any element you actually like. So what we'll do is we'll just nip down here now and just bear with me whilst I start to add these. I just highlight one, highlight there, double click, highlight salesman, double click. And you can see it filling in here, and we can see that filling in here. So I'll just go quiet for a bit whilst I do this. Okay, so we've mapped the first part, and now we've come down to a couple of fields here, which I know from experience that if we don't put a value in here, then the business object will come back saying, I need a value in here. And you sort of think, well, hang on a minute, I don't want a form with asking the operator whether it is exempt from finance charges, or do I want to maintain history? How would an operator do that? And we don't have any fields over here. But what we can do is actually put fixed text. And if you see a button up here, we can actually say, what value do we actually want in this field? And we just put an N in there because we don't want finance charges in there. And in maintenance history, we'll do text, and we'll put a Y in there, and we'll put yes in there. So that's actually how you do that. And again, if you want to remove those, you highlight them, press the del key, and it will remove that. So we just need to go down and carry on mapping some of our bits and pieces. So just bear with me. And I think that's about all of them, isn't it? Oh, we've got customer on hold. Okay, so we've got all our fields mapped. Customer one we're not doing because we mapped it here. So we're going to save that, apply it, and that's that done. Now, in a similar way, although we're not going to be doing it just yet, we can map the output. So we know that when a business object runs and executes, it can return records read, records invalid, that kind of thing, and customer, and you can see them on the left-hand side. And we could quite happily map the response back to fields on here. So if we'd had maybe another pane or maybe another toolbar, we could actually put those there, but we'll ignore those for the time being, and we'll go from there. So that's it for creating the mapping for a transaction data source. And of course, one of the other examples for mapping the output for a transaction data source would be mapping, say, things like journal numbers, because some of the business objects will, on the first use, return a journal number, inventory movements as an example. And then if you use that journal number for subsequent postings, then all the transactions go into that journal. So there are a variety of things that why you would want to map the output. Anyway, since we have created our transaction data source now, and App Designer knows where to put the data, the only other thing to do is to work out where on earth we're actually going to execute this transaction data source. And that typically is done in VBScript, because you will want to control things on the UI before you actually say save the record. Now, I've been doing a bit of tinkering with our app, and I just want to show you some of the bits and pieces. The first bit on the application, at an application level, is that I've set on initial load, set focus to, and I set it to the toolbar customer. So when it loads, we'll find the cursor lurking in here. I've also enabled the status bar. This is the bar at the bottom of the screen, and I've said yes, I want it enabled, only want one section, and when it starts up, it'll just have the fixed text in it saying ready, and we'll see a little bit of VBScript how we can change that as we're going along. And then finally, in the scripting options here, I want to raise the event on gain focus, and if we click on here, we'll say it indicates that the script should be sent the gain focus event for a toolbar entry field, which will be the combo. If checked every time the user sets focus to any editable toolbar field, then this event will be sent to the script. So what I want to do is when somebody clicks in here, I want to catch that event because I want to change the UI. So what I want to do now is just have a look at the VBScript that I've knocked up for you, and just walk you through that. Here we are in our VBScript, and we first start off with the on initialization event, which you know fires as the app starts up. And it's relatively straightforward. I'm just simply disabling a couple of the buttons, the save button and the new button. Remember that the callouts are all over here, so toolbar callouts, and you'll find them there. So once that's disabled, the form will be sitting there waiting for a customer number coming in. So there's a little bit of a debug there. Sometimes I use message box. I mentioned the tracer. There is a call out to write to the tracer, so I can actually write a message out there, which is what I'm doing. And of course, if you left it like that, then your debug messages will appear in the tracer should you load it. And it's actually a really useful way of not so much debugging, but tracing progress through your app and so on. So here we go. If we have a toolbar event, which is what we're trying to trap on there, I'm looking for the event ID, and if the event ID is toolbar gain focus, so this is actually why I checked that checkbox at the application level. Now, don't forget that you've got event types and event IDs here, and you can work, that explains what they are. But basically what this is saying is, if you click in the combo box, I want to do something. So we're basically just checking that it is the combo box we've ticked in, and if it is, then I want to run some VBScript function I've written called start new customer. So let's go and have a quick look at that. Start new customer simply prepares the form for entering or maintaining a customer. So we disable a couple of buttons, we clear the form of the data, and we make sure that it's the form is not editable at this stage because we're still waiting to key a customer number in. We reset the change flag. If anything changes on a toolbar or on a form, anywhere on the app, then a flag is set saying something has changed. And we'll be looking at this a little bit later on, because if nothing has changed, we don't really want to save anything. But if anything has changed, then we need to do something. But we also need to set it to blank each time we come around to do anything. And then I'm just setting focus back to the combo box. So that's as simple as that. Okay, so one can imagine you're going to enter a customer number. You're going to tab off it. What's going to happen is our query data source is going to fire and populate the form, and it's going to, and what we're going to do when we catch that is we're going to check whether the customer exists or not. And it's a little bit of logic. Now, why the reason we're doing this is we want to work out whether we actually want to update, run an update transaction or an add transaction. So what we're basically doing to start with is saving the customer number to an app level, an app-wide variable called customer number. Now, setting variables, global variables across the system, across the app, or local variables are covered in another course, I think entitled, it's course 8, I think, maybe variables and integration of your app to the rest of Syspro. So, but this basically is setting an app level variable with a customer number, and in case we need it later on. We're enabling the save button, toolbar saving, and now we're going to check whether the customer actually exists. So there is a data source validation key call out. We give it a table name and a key, and we can control what comes back into return value. And if we have a look at this data source, and we'll be going through some of these later on, there are a lot here, and this is a data source validate key here. So this is the one we're looking for. Just move off there, and it explains to you what it's doing, and hopefully what we're going to be doing is in an update it'll come back saying it's okay. So what we're basically saying is if the return value is data source key invalid, then at the moment I'm just banging up a message box saying it's an invalid key, we need to go into add mode. We'll add that a little bit later on. We're hopefully that it will be valid because we're going to be testing on customer number 1. So what are we actually going to do? First things first, we're going to update the status bar. So there's a toolbar set status. There's the toolbar. This is the status bar at the bottom. There's the segment 1, and I want you to put the text in editing customer followed by the customer number, and then we are going to set focus onto the first editable field in the form. Now, the form field set focus, we could put the field name in as a second parameter, and it will jump straight to that field. But if we leave it blank, it will hunt down the form from the top until it finds the first enabled editable field on the form, and that's what we actually want because the customer number is disabled. So that's actually what's going to happen, and then with a luck and fair win, because we have enabled the save button, we'll make some changes and we will press the save button. So what's actually going to happen now, first of all, we're picking up the customer number from our variable. That's just a get variable for focus. We could have done this a variety of ways, but I just wanted to work in another call out. We're just doing another check back to see if the customer exists or not. We could have maybe set another variable saying it's fine. And if the return value is data source invalid, then we'll bang up that same error message for the time being. Other than that, what we're going to do is we're going to say data source execute customer number. And that is the line there that actually executes our transaction data source. Okay, and dependent on its success or not, the value will come back into the return value here. And we can see data source execute up the top here. And it actually sort of says 0 will be returned if the data source did not execute successfully. And I also remind you that on the tracer, you can see the data sources executing with their status, whether they failed or not. So you can quite easily trace what's actually going on as well. We've also got on our transaction database the fact that it will, the data source rather, that it will show all errors. So there's a variety of ways in which you can track this. So if it's failed, then what we will do is we will just jump straight back to the first editable field in the form and exit the save function. If not, or rather if it has worked, basically what we'll do is we will change the status bar, and that's the end of it. So let's go and have a quick look at it actually running. So here we are in our little app, and it's fired up the initialization event. Buttons are disabled. The cursor's lurking in the customer combo. Our status says ready. So if we key in a customer number, here we've got our data, which we knew was going to work. A couple of things have happened though. Remember, we basically said if it's a valid customer, then enable the save button and change the status bar at the bottom. So if we come down here, maybe, and we change that, what will have happened now is the flag that basically is set saying something has changed in the app has now been set, and that's the one that we're checking when we're doing the save. That's great. And if we just basically press the save button now, what's going to happen is we're going to be checking once again that it's all still valid, and then we're going to execute the data source. Okay, so where we're at now is that we can see our status bar has gone customer updated. We have no errors. I wasn't actually expecting any. But if we had got errors from the transaction data source itself, we would have had a message box or task dialog box at the front with all the messages on, or we could have caught them in our own code. So now what we want to be able to do is go back and key in another customer. And as soon as we click on here, remember we had taskbar gain focus. Well, as soon as we've done that, it's cleared the form and it's actually disabled these buttons. So we could key in the one again. And we can see our change here. Now, those of you who've written VB script in customized panes and called transaction business objects yourselves, just imagine how many lines of code this would have taken. You'd have had to build the XML in, the XML document, you'd have had to pick up every single field, create the XML document string, you'd have to call the business object, you've probably got to load the response back into a DOM to interrogate it, if it's got any errors, and it goes on and on and on, 50, 60, 70 lines of code. Basically, with the configuration of the transaction data source and the one call out, the app designer has done everything for you. So that's what we're trying to generate, something that will do all the legwork, hard legwork for you, and just encapsulate it in a bit of configuration and a single call out. So what I'm going to do now is do a little bit more code to build in the add function, and we'll go over that VB script and we'll see how that works. Well, I've done a few more changes to our app, but first of all, I want to introduce a new concept. When we started doing data sources and the transaction data source, one of the things that we actually set up was the type of transaction, setup update, and then we had our business object and we mapped our data. And one might imagine that, oh, well, that does the update, so I've got to create another one for the add. And then you sort of think, well, hang on a minute. If I had to populate all these, and it's a real pain if you were doing them all, that means I've got to do them all again for the add function. So in fact, what we will find in our VB script is an ability to change just for the duration of the run of our app, this transaction type. So we can still use the mapping and the XML in, but we're just telling the business object whether we do add or update. So in essence, you only have to do one set of mapping in this example to be able to do either add, update, or delete, which we hopefully might have a chance to look at a little bit later on. So we'll see that little bit of code, and that's what we're doing there. And again, it's just our attempt to keep the amount of work that you've got to do to a minimum. So let's have a look at the code. The first change that I had to make was actually on our combo. Right at the beginning, just to get us going, we actually linked the query data source, bringing back the data for our form onto the combo box, which has worked fine up until the point where we actually want to say we need to detect whether the customer's there or not. Because what actually happens is that if I key in a non-existent customer, What we want our program to do is say, aha, this is a new customer, clear the form, get ready to type some information in. If we keep our query data source linked in here, what actually happens is the query data source says, aha, there is no such customer, therefore the data source has failed. Exit application. The code stops running because there has been failure in the query data source. So what we need to be able to do is unlink it from automatically running from our combo box, and we actually execute it in our VB script. So let's go and have a look at our VB script. Okay, not much has changed here. All the change is actually a bit further down because we've put all our logic in our supporting functions. So the first element here is whether it's working out the add or update. And what we can actually see here is in the change where we had our little message box earlier on, we've put all this bit of code in here. So let's just run through that. First of all, relatively straightforward. If we have done the validation key test and we've given it a non-existent customer number, it will come back here saying data source key invalid. So if our return value data source key invalid, the first thing we want to do is change the status bar saying we're adding a new customer. And then what we want to be able to do is set up the form with some default values. Now, the easiest way of doing this is actually using form update from XML. You give it an XML string which controls the field names and the values in them on the form, and you think, well, how on earth do I actually work out what they are? Well, in fact, if I just simply make a few, we'll get rid of this in a minute. If I go to the form callouts and we want to update the form, we double click this, we select the form, and it automatically generates the XML for you. Now all you've got to do is hack out the bits you don't want changing and put the values in that we do, and that's all I've done. I've just basically got rid of all that and put in, I want the default statement format of 01 and I want an open balance item of I, and that's that. So again, App Designer doing as much of the legwork as it possibly can for you, making it easier. So basically what will happen there is that we have cleared the form, we've populated the form with some default values, and then we set focus to the first editable field in the form, and then we exit the function, and it's as simple as that. Now, we've made a slight change in our logic that says, well, if it is a valid key, and you can see here that I've actually said run the data source to refresh the fields in the form. Rather than a data source execute, we've done a data source refresh. There's our query data source name, and we're passing it the customer number, and that will refresh the form for us, doing exactly what the combo did. Other than that, in that section, nothing else has changed. So imagine that we've keyed in our data and we hit the save button. We've actually got to be able to tell the business object whether we're doing an add or an update. And in exactly the same way, we pop into here, we need to work out whether it's a valid key or not. If it's a new customer, which hopefully in this case it will be, it'll say it's invalid. So the very first thing it does is sort of say, I want to change the data source setup type in the transaction data source called customer maintenance to add. Okay, and then I want to execute, and that's all it is, one line, execute the transaction data source with that customer number, and it will do all the work that we saw earlier on for the update. Basically, what it's saying is, if it comes back and it's failed, then position the cursor at the first editable field in the form and exit the function. And if it has worked, then please update the status bar and just say the customer's been added. And that's it. So what we're going to do is have a go and see whether that's all going to work. Before I go shooting off running the app, there's just one other thing I wanted to show you. When I was designing the form, I actually changed the name of the field from customer branch to branch. And that actually meant that and then we map the branch field to our data source. As part and parcel of changing some of the code, I realized that the magnifying glass wasn't appearing on the field here. So the way that you do that, and the way that Syspro recognizes it's got to put a magnifying glass, is you must put in the name of the field that Syspro recognizes. So relatively straightforward. It's actually known as customer branch. And as soon as I do that, it says, aha, I know what it is. I will put up a magnifying glass, and away you go. So the override description, and we've covered this in previous courses, if you remember, is the name that Syspro knows it, and this is the caption that we see. So you think, that's great. But there's one other thing that it causes. It's we go back to customer maintenance transaction data source and have a look at the data. What's actually happened on the right hand side is my field called branch is now called customer branch, because that's actually what I typed in, and the mapping to the word branch no longer exists, and therefore in the mapping program it's gone red, because it's saying, well, I can't find the field. And indeed, if I run the app, the business object will fail because there's no branch to put in there. So we can simply highlight that. You see the auto filter finding the word branch. I just highlight that and double click it, and it will replace it. So there's a bit of double checking here as you start to change fields. There is quite a knock-on effect, but very, very easy to fix. So we'll apply that. We'll save that. We'll go, and then we will go and run our app. So here we are in our app. I'm not going to bother putting an existing customer in, so we'll just go straight for one that we know doesn't exist. So we can see status bar saying it's adding new customer, so it's detected it doesn't exist. Our save button is here, our defaults are here. Just notice that the branch browse is there. So let's just put some data in. I won't browse for stuff. I'm just going to key the data in that I know actually works. Okay. And there we go, customer added. That's it, done. If we go back up here, disappears, and if we type in 999 tab, we're editing it. So it's actually added it, working, and so on like that. So in a nutshell, that's the basic essence of doing transaction data sources. Just one other thing that we want to make sure, just really for a form control, really, if we did something like that, therefore we've changed the form, what we could do with it, if we come to do an exit, is that it actually says, oh, hang on a minute, you're trying to exit, and you've made a change. Otherwise it's forgotten. So I'll just add that little bit of code, show it to you, and then we can move on. There's one bit of logic that we've yet to address in our application. That's as follows. If we pull up our application, bang in a customer, make some changes to the data, and instead of pressing save, we go to file and exit, or we go to the top right hand corner of a window and close the window, our app will exit without making any save changes to the data. So we need to catch those two events. Now, to do that, the first element that we have to do is at the application level, and it's here. It's setting this property check changes for save. And when that's checked, what that does is it introduces an automatic save changes mechanism. The app, therefore, is keeping an eye on whether any data is checked, changed on toolbars or fields, and then sets a flag if it has changed, and we're able to interrogate that flag. So let's go and have a quick look at the VB script that we have around that. Okay, the place that we put it will be on the on exit. So as the application is exiting, which both the file exit and the closing window will do, the first thing we do is call a call out called toolbar check changes. Now, if we have a look at the check changes, which is here, what toolbar check changes will do is if it has detected any changes on the form, and that you can see here is indicated that it returned a 0. Then it will pop up a task dialog box saying, do you want to save the changes? Yes, no, cancel. And dependent on which button you press, you can therefore catch the return value. And those are explained here. So in this instance, what we're doing is if we make some changes, we go File, Exit, it will drop into the on exit, it will check, realize we've made some changes, pop up the task dialog, and at that point, if we say cancel, and we can see here that 2 is a cancel, just over here, then we drop into this bit of code. And this is the important line here. If you set the App Designer on exit event to false, it will stop the event continuing and will return control back to the app. So in this way, you can control a graceful exit from your app should you need to. So in our instance, it will go back if we set a cancel and maybe you make some changes. If, however, we press yes, which is the 6 save changes here, then all we do is we call our save customer record function and away you go. And it's as simple as that. So just remember, that's the key part there. Excellent. That's as far as I want to take this example. What I've tried to do with it is show you not only how transaction business objects work, but more importantly, how you integrate them to some sort of working app. You'll find that this app is actually a subset of a standard sample deployed with App Designer, and the sample's got the delete button and a few other bits and pieces, and would be worth you sort of having a look at now you've got this far. But we say goodbye to this example and we'll move on and have a look at some of the other bits and pieces. What I'd like to talk to you about next is 2 things. The first is mapping repeating data to the data source, and the second is getting hold of the XML document that App Designer generates for you based on the information that we're mapping. So mapping repeating elements of data occurs primarily with transaction data sources or business objects rather, and in this example we will be using the inventory movements receipt business object to receive a single stock code into stock, but it will be a serial track, so it's got multiple elements of serial numbers. So if we have a quick look at the form we've got, or the app rather, we've got one small form here, stock code warehouse posting a bit of other information. We've got a list view which will have rows of information for each serial number, and then we will have a look at the XML document generated automatically by App Designer as we go along. So first of all, let's have a quick look at the data source. So here we are, we have a business object data source. Just a reminder on the error handling, I've got it set to show all errors, but your options are show 1 error at a time or show no errors at all. This is a post-transaction business object, and the business object I want to use is inv-TMR, which is the inventory receipts. So let's first of all have a look at our XML in. This is just really to highlight to you that you can actually inject variables into the XML in. Quite often with posting business objects, you do need to inject data into the XML in. You can pick it up from forms or toolbars. In this case, I'm putting a posting date in there. If we have a look at the mapping of the data, the first thing to note is that if the XSD for the business object believes that a particular element, you can have multiples of those elements, we actually put the word repeat next to that element. So this business object, as an example, can take inventory receipts from multiple stock codes. But let's, for the sake of argument, assume that we're just going to be doing the single stock code. So we'll ignore that. We simply just basically map the fields that we actually want to fill in, which we've done before in the query data source. And we can see here now for a single stock code, we might have multiple bins, multiple serials, and so on like that. Now, what we've got over here, we can see that I've mapped my stock code, my warehouse, and my quantity. My posting date I had in my XML in, and my journal number I will be mapping from the output and we'll see that in a short while. And then my serials, or my list view rather, I'm simply mapping to my repeating node here, just in the same way. There's no difference at all. The only difference that does occur is that when App Designer starts to build the XML document, it says, aha, I've got a repeating element here, and I've got a list view. So I'm assuming that for each one of these repeating nodes, I've got a row in a list view, and it will automatically go down the list view and generate multiple serials for us. And that's all we've got to do. So from our configuration point of view, it's dead simple. And then finally, looking at the output from a business object, certainly transaction ones often come back with all sorts of different bits of information. But key to us here is the journal number. We actually want to write the journal back into the form, which is what's actually going on here. Okay, so let's close that. And then I think what we will do is we will run our app and see it actually working. So this is my little test app. Let me just explain it. The data is coming into the form, and the list view is hard-coded in the VB script, which we'll see shortly. And I have got the syntax text editor at the bottom to show you the XML document that actually App Designer will create as it passes it through to the business object, which is really useful. I find this, just as an aside, I find the syntax editor really good debugging tool as you're testing it. And if you just chuck the XML in, it prettifies it and makes it readable and stuff. Anyway, and then the data source is actually run directly from the post button here. And then when we press it, we see a couple of things happening. You saw that the XML document came in first because clearly that's been built first. I'll just do that again. And then because I've got show all errors, we see that the serial numbers already exist for both serials that I've done because I've done the transaction before. And in the XML, we can see that the repeating serials have occurred here, one for each row. So fairly straightforward. Let's have a quick look at the VB script. Well, there's no new VB script in this script that we haven't already covered, but just to nip through, I'm just using a little bit of XML format to populate the fields. You can see my hard-coded values in here. Just as an aside, when you double-click on the call-out form update from XML, it generates all this for you. All you've got to do is fill in the fields. And obviously clear data equals true means wipe the data, repopulate, so that's dead easy. Then I've got a little function at the bottom called build serial XML. It just builds the data for the list view, and I just simply add it. So that's all very straightforward. I'm running the data source directly off the button, the post button, which executes it. And at the same time, I am actually doing a call out, which is get data source XML document for that inventory receipts. So what it does is it runs through the substitution logic and returns us the XML document into a variable. I'm clearing the syntax editor, and then I'm just chucking the XML into the syntax editor. Very simple stuff. Now, there's one thing that I wanted to raise. You can see here that I've commented out. I could have done a data source execute inventory receipts and then do some logic on the return value. That's quite acceptable, and some people would like to do it because it's all in one place. If, however, you run it, the data source straight from another button, as we've done, then two other things become available, and they're two new events: on before transaction and on after transaction. And if we go down here, on before transaction, you can get hold of the file name and the data source name, but it's an event designed really to try to allow you to do something before the transaction happens. It might be that you want to massage the XML again. It might be that you want to put a little bit of business logic dependent on things, and the same with the after transaction. You get that as well, and you can do something after the transaction. Now, if you run a data source execute like this, those two events don't fire. And the reason for that is that you can't fire an event when you're in an event. So we're currently in the on-user event doing a call out. We can't jump out of this event, run another event and come back again. So just be aware of that, subtle bits and pieces. So that's all we need to cover for business transaction data sources for business. So we will wrap this up, and then the next section will be to have a look at custom data sources.